Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the colossal thinkers of history and, well, we break down exactly why their ideas still shape your reality, often without you even realizing it.
And today, we are really strapping in.
We are. Today we're tackling the original architect of the Western mind, Aristotle.
Indeed, we are undertaking a monumental deep dive into the intellectual paradigm of the Stagirite born in 384 BC in Stagira. And our mission is pretty ambitious.
It is.
We need to trace this unified thread that connects his systematic approach to logic, his classification of life, his foundational physics, and all the way up to his ultimate conclusion on the nature of God, the unmoved mover.
We have a dense stack of sources today that help us track this influence, and they show how his philosophy didn't just stay locked up in a school in Athens.
No, not at all.
It moved from the Greek polis to the far reaches of Alexander's empire, and this is crucial. It later became the conceptual language for Christian theology. So the mission today is to really get the depth of that intellectual paradigm shift.
And that paradigm shift is really the story of philosophy grounding itself. I mean, we often talk about two colossal figures defining ancient thought: Plato, his teacher, and Aristotle, his student.
Right.
You think of Plato, he was the philosopher of the transcendent. Truth, for him, resided in these static, perfect, untouchable forms that existed somewhere outside of time and space.
Right.
His gaze was fundamentally directed, upward, away from the messy, changing world.
And Aristotle, who spent 20 years learning at Plato's academy, basically walks out and pivots 180 degrees.
A complete pivot. He fundamentally changes the direction of the inquiry. Aristotle becomes the philosopher of the immanent. He demands that knowledge is found not by looking up and withdrawing, but by grounding our gaze in the soil of the natural world.
So right in front of us.
Right in front of us. The concrete reality, the tree, the fish, the political constitution, these are the starting points for discovering the dynamic intelligibility of things as they actually are.
And this shift, from the abstract ideal to the detailed empirical observation, that is the defining feature of his legacy, isn't it? Our sources show how he systematically classified reality, he formalized the very rules of thought we rely on, and laid out the causal structures of the universe.
He didn't just give us philosophy. He gave us the intellectual tools to dissect and understand the world scientifically.
We truly owe the foundations of nearly every systematic field of study. I'm talking biology, political science, formal logic, ethics.
It all goes back to his method. He categorized reality, and in doing so, he made it manageable for human thought.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we get into the technical machinery of his thought, the logic and the physics, we have to start with what might be the most fascinating collision of intellect and brute power in history. The teacher, Aristotle, and the young man who would become Alexander the Great.
This is so much more than a historical footnote. This pedagogical alliance is, I think, the defining historical moment where abstract intellect meets raw power, and philosophy is translated directly onto the geopolitical stage with world-altering consequences.
The setup is almost cinematic. It's around 343 BC, and King Philip II, the king of Macedon, invites Aristotle to the Macedonian court at Pella to tutor his 13-year-old son, Alexander III. And this isn't just about hiring a reputable teacher. This is a calculated convergence. You have the zenith of Greek philosophical thought and the rising tide of Macedonian hegemony, a kingdom that was on the brink of conquering the known world.
What Philip wanted was a tutor who could instill the cultural values of Greece into his son, who the southern Greeks still viewed as a kind of barbarian outsider.
Sure.
And what Aristotle gave this ambitious young man was not just literacy, but a profound passion for intellectual coherence and unity.
A passion for unity, that sounds very abstract, but for Aristotle, unity was a metaphysical necessity, right? His philosophy argued that the entire cosmos was a unified whole, ordered by a single first cause.
Exactly.
And on a smaller scale, in politics, he prized the unity of the polis, the city-state, as the highest form of community.
Absolutely. The philosopher looks at the universe and sees underlying order. The political scientist looks at the city-state and sees necessary cohesion. Alexander, however,
Being Alexander,
a man of unprecedented ambition, he took this foundational concept and just universalized it. He transposed his teacher's metaphysical drive for unity onto the geopolitical stage. And that became the engine driving his subsequent conquest of the Persian Empire.
So it wasn't just about conquering land or accumulating treasure. Our sources consistently highlight his goal to create homonoia, or concord, to bind the disparate peoples of Europe and Asia into a single cohesive civilization. The famous goal, maybe idealistic, was to literally make the known world speak the same language.
And this was realized in a very practical, very Aristotelian way. The deliberate policy of spreading Koine Greek, the common dialect across this massive empire, wasn't just for administrative ease.
It was more than that.
Oh, much more. It was a calculated attempt at cultural unification. If Aristotle argued that a single logic undergirds all rational thought, Alexander believed a single language could underpin a universal empire, streamlining governance, commerce, and the flow of ideas from Macedonia all the way to the edges of India.
So, in a way, Alexander's military campaign takes on this completely new dimension. It was an exercise in Aristotelian empirical investigation.
That's it.
It suggests that the Lyceum, the school Aristotle would later found, essentially traveled with the army.
That is the most insightful nugget our sources provide. I mean, think about it. Alexander's expedition was, in part, the world's first large-scale, state-sponsored research institute. He understood, as his teacher taught, that knowledge, episteme, begins with collecting particulars.
You can't organize the world if you don't understand the data of the world.
Exactly. So he didn't just take soldiers. He took armies of scientists, botanists, zoologists, geographers, and historians. And their specific task was to investigate the new cultures and ecosystems they encountered.
This commitment to empirical data gathering was just unprecedented. We know from records that Alexander commissioned his own nephew, Callisthenes, to document the expedition, but the scale goes far beyond a single chronicler.
It does. The sources report that Alexander ordered thousands of men across his newly conquered territories, fishermen, hunters, governors, to report back to Aristotle specifically.
Back to him in Greece.
Yes, to report on the habits, the anatomy, and the life cycles of birds, beasts, and fishes. Just imagine that massive logistical effort, all for collecting biological facts.
Wow.
And that influx of biological data was the raw material for Aristotle's taxonomy. It allowed him to compile his seminal History of Animals. And this work provided such comprehensive and accurate descriptions and classifications that it remained the gold standard, unrivaled, for 2 millennia.
So that shows the direct, immediate impact of philosophical method on world history.
It does. And this empirical zeal wasn't limited to nature. The scientists also investigated the social structures and histories of the barbarians, which, it mirrors Aristotle's famous political methodology.
He famously collected and analyzed 158 political forms or constitutions to derive universal truths about governance.
Right, so the empire essentially became his field laboratory for political science, connecting his drive for cosmic classification and order directly to his study of humanity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because despite this intense intellectual symbiosis, a deep philosophical fissure ultimately separated the teacher and the student.
Right at the peak of Alexander's success.
And it was about Aristotle's massive blind spot regarding the people his student was conquering.
He had one. For all his genius in classification and observation, Aristotle remained deeply rooted in the ethnocentrism of the Greek polis. His belief system placed Greeks at the pinnacle of civilization, capable of reason and self-governance. He considered all non-Greeks, the barbarians, as inherently inferior.
And he didn't mince words in his advice to the future king.
No. Our sources confirm he advised Alexander to treat Greeks as friends and equals, but to treat the barbarians as if they were merely plants and animals.
Wow.
Plants and animals.
It's a brutal categorization, viewing them as naturally suited only for slavery because they were supposedly incapable of the rational life that defined the true Hellene.
That's political taxonomy taken to a toxic extreme. But Alexander, he rejected this racial hierarchy in practice, didn't he?
He had to. As he moved east, he encountered the sophisticated administrations, the complex legal structures, and the undeniable nobility of Persian and other Eastern leaders. He realized that this passion for unity he had absorbed from Aristotle required cultural fusion.
A synthesis.
A synthesis of the best of East and West, not just subjugation based on an Athenian philosopher's outdated worldview.
And this divergence, it culminates in one of the most provocative political statements of the ancient world, the mass wedding at Susa in 324 BC, an action that was utterly anathema to Aristotle's doctrine of racial purity and cultural separation. Alexander first married Roxana and later Statira, the daughter of Darius III, symbolically fusing the Macedonian dynasty with the Persian royal house.
But he didn't stop there. He compelled 80 of his key officers and something like 10,000 of his soldiers to intermarry with local women.
He wasn't just merging kingdoms, he was attempting to create a new, universal ruling class, defined by shared loyalty rather than inherited race.
It was a deliberate, irreversible act of biological and cultural unification.
And it demonstrated how Alexander, the student, took the master's fundamental idea unity and applied it in a radically different, and you could argue more ambitious, universalist manner than the master himself could ever have conceived. Alexander's unity was based on shared culture and governance. Aristotle's was based on a rigid philosophical hierarchy.
So after his time with Alexander, Aristotle returns to Athens in 335 BC and founds his own school, the Lyceum. It's situated in a sacred grove, and this place immediately rivals Plato's academy, which Aristotle had recently left.
It does.
But the Lyceum became famous less for its location and more for its method.
And that method was the Peripatetic method. The name comes from the Greek peripatetikos, which means literally given to walking about.
Walking about.
The Lyceum was designed with these covered walkways, or peripatos, and Aristotle taught his advanced students while walking.
This simple physical act teaching while moving is so symbolic of his intellectual goals. I mean, why couldn't he just sit down in a chair like Plato's disciples did in the academy? What was the deeper significance of the physical movement?
The walking mirrored the fundamental difference between the two schools of thought. As we said, Plato sought truth in the stillness of contemplation, requiring withdrawal from the senses to grasp the immutable forms.
But Aristotle sought truth in the investigation of the changing, messy, observable world.
Exactly. The act of walking through the environment, observing the trees, the changing shadows, the conversations of the market, it integrated the mind and the body. It was mobile dialogue, combining abstract thought with concrete observation.
So the physical posture of walking symbolized the dynamic, grounded nature of his whole philosophy.
It confirmed that the truth was to be found in the world, not away from it.
That makes perfect sense. It's an extremely integrated form of learning. You're literally moving with the world, examining it as you go.
And this image of the teacher walking with his students creates a striking historical parallel, one that our sources highlight specifically in connection with the itinerant ministry of Jesus of Nazareth hundreds of years later.
That is a remarkable comparison, the founder of empirical science placed alongside the founder of Christianity. It suggests an ancient archetype for how profound wisdom is transmitted.
It absolutely points to a shared ancient archetype of discipleship. Like Aristotle, Jesus was a peripatetic teacher. He didn't confine instruction to static centers of power like the synagogue or the temple courts.
Right.
He taught on the road to Emmaus, in the cornfields, by the sea, moving through villages.
So in both traditions, wisdom is communicated not through a static lecture in a cloistered room, but in the context of a walk, a shared active journey, where the teaching is immediately contextualized by the environment.
And the language reinforces this shared method. The Greek word for disciple, mathetes, it implies a learner. But in that ancient cultural context, it meant a total follower who adopted the entire lifestyle and intellectual path of the master.
Just as the Peripatetics adhered to Aristotle's intellectual way, Jesus' disciples defined their existence by following his way.
Precisely. However, the goals of these two peripatetic movements, despite the structural similarity, were worlds apart.
A profound divergence.
Yes, Aristotle's peripatetic method was designed to produce philosophers, men of independent critical intellect capable of rigorous scientific inquiry. The walking fostered dialogue, debate, and detailed observation of the natural world. It was about developing the capacity for logical reasoning.
Whereas Jesus' call to follow me was a demand for total existential submission and transformation, seeking a different reality altogether.
Exactly. Aristotle's students walked to observe the world and catalog its phenomena. Jesus' disciples walked to deny the world and seek a kingdom not of this world. So while the structural similarity underscores the ancient view that true education requires proximity and immersion, walking with, the ultimate destination, the object of study, and the nature of the required submission were fundamentally different.
That's a powerful distinction, and it provides a great transition. We've discussed the physical walk, the method of observation. Now we need to discuss the tools they were using while they walked. We are moving from the physical act of inquiry to the mental instrument that structures it, logic.
Indeed. To understand the cosmos Aristotle saw, we have to first look at the tool he gave us, what he called the organon. He's universally acknowledged as the father of formal logic.
The father of logic.
And his foundational work was so secure that for centuries, thinkers genuinely believed he had completed the subject entirely.
And his foundational texts, collected under the name organon, that literally means the tool, right? That title itself tells you everything about how he saw logic.
It does. Aristotle is emphatic. Logic is not a science in itself like physics or biology. It is the instrument, the necessary prerequisite for all other sciences. Is the foundation of intelligibility.
So before you can even start to analyze the natural world, you must first possess the reliable means to distinguish a true argument from a false one.
A coherent thought from an incoherent one.
Yeah.
And he didn't see himself as an inventor of this tool. He saw himself as a discoverer.
That's a vital distinction for you, the listener, to grasp.
It is. He didn't invent the rules of valid inference. He defined them. He viewed these rules as inherent in the very structure of reality. Just as a geometrician discovers the properties of a triangle, Aristotle discovered the logical laws that govern being and thought.
So logic is the scaffolding of the cosmos.
It is. And for Aristotle, the stakes of logic are immense. It's not just about winning an argument, it's what separates the orderly cosmos from the terrifying possibility of chaos.
Chaos.
Precisely. Our sources state it plainly. That which is illogical is unintelligible. If a proposition violates logic, it ceases to be meaningful. It has no stable referent in reality. If we believe the universe is a cosmos, an ordered whole governed by laws, then it must be intelligible to our reason.
If logic didn't hold, the universe would be unstable. Definitions would collapse, causality would fail.
We would inhabit a nightmare of instability. The function of logic is therefore existential. It's the yardstick that measures or analyzes the relationships of statements or propositions. If a statement fails that test, it fails the test of reality.
And the centerpiece of this entire structure, the very bedrock, is the law of non-contradiction, which he defines in Metaphysics Gamma.
It is the most certain of all principles, because its negation results in the complete collapse of meaning. The definition is deceptively simple. Something cannot be what it is and not be what it is at the same time and in the same relationship.
The implication is massive. It's not just a rule of thought. It's a rule of being, valid for all reality everywhere.
Let's just unpack that for a minute. If we take that proposition seriously, that this is a rule of being, what does that mean for you listening in the 21st century? It means that if we were to discover alien life on a distant planet, their physics, their biology, and their civilization would still have to conform to the law of non-contradiction.
A tree on Kepler 186f cannot simultaneously be a tree and not be a tree in the same way at the same time.
It cannot. That is a stunning thought experiment. But it suggests rationality itself is not a human invention, but a discovery about the nature of the universe. It's the precondition for reality itself.
And this is where we need to introduce the central mechanism of his formal logic. The syllogism.
The syllogism, the foundational argument structure that dominated Western thought for over 2 millennia, it is the mechanism by which we move from established truths to new necessary conclusions.
Right, the 3 parts, a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion.
Exactly. Let's use the classic example. The major premise is a universal truth. All men are mortal.
That's the broad category.
The minor premise brings a particular instance into that category. Socrates is a man.
And the conclusion is the unavoidable logical necessity drawn from the first 2. Therefore, Socrates is mortal.
Now, this may seem elementary to us now, but Aristotle formalized the process of valid inference. He showed that if your premises are true and your structure is valid, the conclusion must be true. This provided the first universal standardized engine for intellectual certainty.
It was the operating system for philosophy and early science.
It really was. And this certainty is why he drew that powerful distinction between the rational and the real. You can conceive of things that are rational. They don't violate logic, but are not real. The classic example is a golden mountain.
It's rational. I can picture it. Gold exists, mountains exist, but it's not actual.
Right. But the converse is absolute. The illogical cannot exist in reality. An intellectual short circuit like a square circle or a four-sided triangle is not just something we haven't found yet.
It's something that is ontologically impossible.
It is. The simultaneous assertion of contradictory definitions leads to chaos, the rupture of being.
And that principle is so robust we can use it, as our sources suggest, to analyze classic paradoxes, like the one about the immovable object and the irresistible force.
Yes, the paradox that asks if an object that cannot be moved can coexist with a force that can move anything. It is designed to trap the intellect.
But logically, their coexistence is impossible under Aristotle's law of non-contradiction.
It is. The contradiction lies in their simultaneous assertion. Aristotle's logic dictates that these attributes are mutually exclusive in the same universe. If the object is truly immovable,
then the force, when you apply it, has to fail, which means the force is resistible.
Exactly. And if the force is truly irresistible, then when it encounters the object must move, which means the object is movable.
So by asserting both titles, irresistible and immovable, you are violating the chief principle of being.
The paradox collapses because in a rational universe, one is not what it claims to be. You have asserted a contradiction, and a contradiction cannot exist in reality. It's an intellectual short circuit that proves their coexistence is impossible within a rational cosmos. And this shows how Aristotle used logic not just for argument, but as a test of reality itself.
The strength of Aristotle's logic and the syllogism is so tightly linked to his insistence on clear definition and classification, what we call taxonomy.
Inextricably linked. We often treat taxonomy as a dry filing system for biology, but for Aristotle, it was existential. Taxonomy is crucial to all knowledge because knowledge is propositional.
It depends on language.
It depends on language for its very intelligibility. If language is vague, the entire edifice of knowledge collapses. And Aristotle was utterly convinced that meaning depends on limitation. This is his great maxim, and for anyone listening, you should write this down. A word that means everything actually means nothing.
That is a tremendously powerful concept, especially in our age of information overload. If you don't define what a thing is, you can't distinguish it from anything else, and therefore you can't know it.
Every definition, or horismos, the Greek word for drawing a boundary, functions by affirmation and denial. To define man is to affirm certain specific properties, possessing reason, being bipedal, and so on. And in that affirmation, you are simultaneously denying that man is a fish, a stone, or an angel.
If the word man applied equally to every entity, it would lose all descriptive power. It would become meaningless noise.
Absolutely. And Aristotle wasn't just imposing an arbitrary human filing system on the world. He believed that good taxonomy was mapping the actual joints of reality.
So classification into genus and species was a way of tracing the ontological structures inherent in the world.
Yes. Taxonomy, for him, was the linguistic map of the ontological territory. Without this careful science of definition, all scientific pursuit is lost in ambiguity.
And this obsession with how things are defined, categorized, and how they function, it leads us directly to the great explanatory architecture he built, the four causes.
The four causes.
Yeah.
His comprehensive framework, or atia, for understanding change, existence, and purpose. This is where he synthesized all previous Greek thought. He took the materialists, who only focused on what things were made of.
The stuff.
The stuff. And the Platonists, who only focused on the essence or form. And he merged them into a comprehensive four-part system that defines explanation itself.
Okay, let's slow down and use his classic analogy of the sculptor making a statue to walk through these four causes. We start with the material cause.
The material cause is the simplest, that out of which a thing is made. The stuff. In the case of the statue, that's the block of marble, the bronze, or the clay. It's the raw potential that accepts the form.
Okay. Then we move to the formal cause.
The formal cause is the essence, the structure, the shape, or the pattern that determines what the thing is. This is the idea in the sculptor's mind, the blueprint, the form of Athena or Poseidon. It dictates the identity.
Got it. Next is the efficient cause, which is the one we almost exclusively mean when we use the word cause today.
Right. The efficient cause is the active agent, the primary source of change or motion. This is the sculptor himself, applying the chisel and hammer. It is the thing that actively moves the marble from a potential statue to an actual statue. It initiates the process.
And finally, the final cause, the telos. This is the one that our sources noted often gets lost or discarded in modern scientific discourse.
The final cause, or telos, is that for which a thing is made, the purpose, the end, the goal. Why was the statue created? To decorate a garden, to commemorate a victory, or maybe for veneration in a temple? The purpose dictates the form, function, and trajectory of the creation.
Okay, so if the telos is so central to his comprehensive explanation, why did modern science drop it? When we talk about the final cause getting lost, are we talking about the scientific revolution?
We are, precisely. This is one of the most critical shifts in Western thought. Figures like Francis Bacon and René Descartes, at the dawn of the scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th centuries, actively removed the final cause from the study of nature.
But why? Why the deliberate removal of purpose?
Because they realized that asking what is the purpose of this object leads to speculation and theology, which is inherently non-testable.
I see.
Science wanted predictive power and mechanisms. If you ask what is the efficient cause of this rock falling, you get gravity, mass, momentum, you get measurable, testable answers. If you ask what is the final cause of this rock falling, to obey the law of nature, to fulfill its rockness, you get a philosophical dead end.
So modern science became almost exclusively a search for efficient causes and material causes.
It did. It left the tellus to philosophy or religion.
That clarifies the rift perfectly. But let's go back to Aristotle. Our sources show how powerfully these four categories influenced later theology, becoming the conceptual bridge between Greek philosophy and systematized Christian thought.
This is a spectacular instance of philosophical appropriation. The early Christian theologians, the patristic thinkers, they were struggling to articulate the cosmic role of Christ in ways that made sense to the highly educated Hellenistic world.
And they realized Aristotle's framework was perfect.
It was perfect for arguing that Christ was not merely a historical figure or a minor part of creation, but the comprehensive explanation for it. He is asserted to be all of these.
And they used specific biblical passages to map this out, turning abstract religious claims into organized propositional statements, which is a very Aristotelian process.
Exactly. Take Romans 11.36. For from him and through him and to him are all things. When you map that onto the causes, it defines Christ's supremacy perfectly, systemically organizing the argument.
From him, exo2, that correlates precisely to the efficient cause. He is the absolute source, the active agent of creation.
Right. Through him, DO2, that is the instrumental or formal cause. He is the logos, the divine reason, the structure, the wisdom through which the chaotic potential of matter was ordered into a stable cosmos. He is the blueprint.
And to him, eis auton. That's the final cause. He is the ultimate goal, the telos of all history and existence.
This was revolutionary. It provided the necessary conceptual structure, the philosophical grammar, to express the complex ideas of Christology, bridging the gap between Hellenistic philosophy and Hebrew scripture.
And the connection gets even more detailed in Colossians 1.15:20, which attributes these causalities almost systematically.
It does. The passage calls Christ the image, icon of the invisible God. That is a direct, strong reference to the formal cause. He is the perfect form revealing the Father's nature, and for by him all things were created is the clear, efficient cause, the active agent of Genesis.
And as we noted, Colossians 1.1 provides a layer that moves slightly beyond the traditional four causes. In him, all things hold together.
This introduces the concept of a sustaining cause. It argues that creation is not a machine that was built and then left to run, like in deism. Rather, it requires active, continuous sustenance. Right. Without this constant presence, the entire cosmos, created by the efficient cause and structured by the formal cause, would immediately dissolve back into chaos.
So, by using the Aristotelian framework, the theologians were arguing that Christ is the only word that actually means everything, the comprehensive logic that prevents the universe from collapsing back into actually nothing.
And this entire discussion of causality and definition, it leads us to Aristotle's ultimate metaphysical conclusion. The capstone of his philosophy, the existence of God, or the unmoved mover.
But to get there, we have to first address a profound problem he inherited from earlier thinkers, the problem of change itself.
Right. The Eleatic philosopher Parmenides had argued that change was impossible because you cannot get what is from what is not.
Yeah.
How do you go from one state to a completely different state without creating something from nothing?
And Aristotle solved this seemingly impossible riddle by introducing the distinction between potentiality, dynamis, and actuality, energy.
This is the key mechanism of all motion and becoming.
Okay, so potentiality is the capacity to become something different. The acorn is potentially an oak tree. The block of marble is potentially a statue.
And actuality is the fulfillment of that capacity, the realized oak tree, the finished statue. But the key insight, which he hammered home, is the absolute priority of actuality. Actuality must always precede the potential.
This is because a potentiality cannot actualize itself.
It can't.
Yeah.
If the marble has the potential to become a statue, it will remain a block of marble forever unless it's acted upon by something that is already actual, an actual sculptor with actual tools.
Let's use an analogy for the listener's benefit.
Good idea. Think of a child. That child has the potential to become a world-class mathematician. But that potentiality cannot actualize itself. It requires an actual teacher, actual books, and actual lessons to initiate the transition from potential to actual mathematician.
So actuality is the necessary initiator of change. And this leads to his deduction that there can be no such thing as pure potentiality in the world.
Correct. He argues that if something were purely potential, it would be potentially anything, but actually nothing. Since nothing cannot exist in reality, a concept that violates the law of non-contradiction, pure potentiality is an abstraction. Even the most formless matter, Heil, always exists with some minimal form.
And this priority of actuality is the logical lever he uses to establish the necessity of a first cause.
Precisely. If every change requires an efficient cause to move it from potential to actual, and that cause requires another cause to move it from potential to actual, we're faced with what he called the illogical morass of infinite regress.
A house of cards with no foundation.
Exactly. You would have an endless chain of dependencies, but you can't have an infinite chain of efficient causes. Why? Because if the chain goes back infinitely, there is no first cause, which means no one ever started the motion, and thus there could be no subsequent motion or change in the present.
And since we see motion and change all around us,
Since we know the cosmos is dynamic, that infinite regress is logically impossible. Therefore, since motion exists, there must be a terminus, an uncaused cause, an unmoved mover.
and if it is the first cause, it cannot have been moved by anything else. It must be self-sufficient in its existence.
Which means it has no potentiality whatsoever that needs actualizing. It must be pure actuality, actus purus. And this philosophical deduction is the classical root that God is a logically necessary being, derived purely from observing change in the universe.
So if the mover is pure actuality and cannot change, what attributes does that necessity confer upon it?
It confers profound characteristics. Because it cannot change, it must be eternal. It cannot begin or end. It must be immaterial, because matter implies potentiality, the ability to change form. And crucially, it must be immutable. It can't have motion, growth, or maturation of any kind.
It's absolute perfect pure being because it has no unrealized potential.
It has nowhere to go. It simply is.
So the ultimate philosophical puzzle then becomes, how does a being that is perfect, immutable, and cannot move itself actually move the entire vast universe? It can't push anything.
This is Aristotle's most poetic and, I think, most profound theological insight. And it's the core of his cosmology. The unmoved mover moves the world not by force, but by attraction.
That is a critical distinction, especially when you contrast it with a later god who acts through command or intervention. This is a pull of desire, a telos in motion.
He uses the analogy of a beloved object. Think of a beautiful painting or a perfectly composed piece of music. That object does not move itself, but it moves the soul of the viewer, drawing them irresistibly toward it. The viewer moves, seeking to engage with the beauty. The object remains perfectly still and unmoved.
So the mover is the final cause, the object of all desire.
The mover is the ultimate telos, the absolute perfection that all other things in the cosmos desire to imitate. All motion and change are the result of things striving to participate in the mover's eternal, perfect nature.
Which explains the heavens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The celestial spheres and the stars, for example, they move in perfect, unchanging circles, because that circular motion is the closest they can get to imitating the eternal, cyclical nature of the divine. All sublunary change, birth, death, growth, is the result of things attempting to fulfill their potential and achieve their own perfection.
But, and this is a bit but, despite this language of universal longing and attraction, Aristotle's God is fundamentally an impersonal force.
Critically so. The mover is pure, self-sufficient intellect. It is defined as thought thinking itself, eternally contemplating its own perfect essence.
Because it's pure perfection, its only appropriate object of thought is itself.
Right. And here's the key, sometimes shocking point.
Yeah.
It is completely unaware of the cosmos yearning for it.
It is the ultimate object of the world's love, but it is not a lover of the world.
Exactly. It provides the anchor for purpose and motion in the universe through its sheer, undeniable existence. But it is not a personal governor or interventionist deity. It's a self-contained, perfect, logical necessity that provides the foundation for teleology, the study of purpose in the universe, without ever having to dirty its hands with the messy details of efficient causation in the changing world.
Aristotle of Stagira truly stands as the colossus of the ancient world. His categories define the structure of Western consciousness. I mean, he provided the indispensable intellectual tools for unity, both political and metaphysical, that we are still using today.
From the Peripatetic colonnades of the Lyceum, he gave us logic, the Organon, the instrument that separates the chaos of the illogical from the ordered cosmos of the real. He gave us taxonomy, the discipline of definition, horismos, that saves language from meaninglessness, insisting that a word that means everything means nothing.
And he gave us the four causes, that comprehensive scaffold upon which both modern science would build its investigation of efficient and material causes, and theology would build its systematic explanation of ultimate existence.
He created a system that made the world intelligible. He insisted that knowledge must begin with a grounded gaze-moving philosophy, from the abstract, unreachable heights of Plato down to the concrete reality we can observe, measure, and classify.
We began by noting the paradox of his political influence. He taught Alexander a passion for unity that the student then enacted by rejecting the teacher's rigid ethnocentrism, choosing cultural fusion over racial purity.
And we end with the paradox of his greatest metaphysical deduction, the unmoved mover. Aristotle deduced a logically necessary immovable being that moves all things by attraction, by being the object of universal desire.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to chew on. Aristotle's legacy forces us to live in a fascinating intellectual tension. He gave us the tools of hyper-rationality, the syllogism, taxonomy, the pursuit of empirical data. But he concluded that the ultimate driver of the universe is not rationality, but desire. Eros.
This profound vision of an ultimate perfection that the world must always pursue, the ultimate telos, laid the essential groundwork for subsequent civilizations. It prepared the mind to accept a God who is both the ultimate beginning, the efficient cause, and the final end, the final cause, the alpha and the omega. The tension lies in whether that necessary perfect being remains aloof and unaware of the cosmos that yearns for it, or whether the object of all desire eventually becomes a lover of the world. And that question really defines the next 2,000 years of philosophical inquiry.